Good morning. Did everyone have a great night in New York City last night? Who saw a show? Oh, awesome. Yeah, great. Saw some Patti LuPone people, war paint. Appreciate that. So this whole conference is about digital marketing expertise, but I have realized in my work with so many arts and cultural organizations and working in arts and cultural organizations that expertise is not enough to drive change in an organization. And in order for innovation to really take hold, organizations need to focus on their culture. And to continue my analogy from yesterday, if SEO and measurement are the vegetables and videos are the dessert, I think culture is really the plate and the foundation that it is served on. Saw that one this morning on my way in. And I feel like organizational culture is just something we don't talk about enough at arts conferences. In fact, almost never. And I am so thrilled to be here with Jennifer Zaslow, who is my executive coach, and we'll find out what that means in a minute. But as I have grown as a leader, it has really been so much through my work with Jennifer, and we meet regularly to talk about challenges of leadership and growth and values. And Jennifer's also come in to work with my team on a number of workshops to help us with listening skills and communication and topics of inclusion. And it's been really wonderful for I think, me and my entire team. And for those See Eye to Eye podcast listeners, you may have heard one of our first podcasts was me interviewing Jennifer, which was a really popular episode. And I think that these conversations and this topic is just fundamental for the health of any organization, and it'll really help your organization thrive. So before we dive in, let me first ask, for people who don't know, what is an executive coach, or what is a coach?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me. Like you, I feel like culture is the underpinning of everything, including the happiness of all of you, which I feel very invested in. What's a coach? So as a coach, I work with you to unlock your potential, help you get over feeling stuck about whatever you might feel stuck about. When I say you, I don't mean you necessarily.
The proverbial you.
My job is to see the magnificence in you. And I say that because we all have blind spots about ourselves. We all have blind spots about our strengths and our challenges, which we'll get into more. But you come to me with your goals, what you want to accomplish, and I work with you to help you achieve them. And I also kind of poke at you a little bit to try to get you to go beyond what you might otherwise do. And I would just say that also extends to working with teams, right? Because what works for us, it begins with us. We put our own oxygen mask on first. And then how do we extend those learnings to the team to better communicate, to better support one another?
Mm-hmm. I think recently you told me I need to look for the magnificence in everyone. And I thought that was such a helpful thing when working, finding the magnificence in that person, even if you're feeling stuck or having trouble with another department or a person in another department. Find the magnificence in that person. And I thought that was so helpful.
Especially when you're feeling frustrated with someone you work with.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's a good moment to try to see their magnificence.
It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
So this is about culture, and I want to ask a very basic question, and what is culture?
Yeah. Well, if you think of a petri dish, right, the culture is what allows something to grow or die. Right? So the culture it's the air we breathe, it's our environment. In a company or an organization, it's typically a shared set of values and norms that guides our behavior. beyond what are our goals, right? We talk a ton, especially in marketing, about goals and metrics and deliverables, and we're evaluated against those things. But there's also something else that we don't talk very much about, which is, what about our values? What about how we behave towards one another, how we treat one another, how we tell the truth or don't? And we don't typically get evaluated on those things, and those are the kind of intangibles that don't need to be so intangible that make up culture.
Yeah. I have a question. Who here feels like they have a very clear understanding of their company's organizational values, that the values have been defined of what your company stands for, and it's very clearly communicated? That's more than I expected. That's great.
Really?
Yeah.
Can I probe that a second?
Yeah, please.
That doesn't mean we agree with them.
Right. Do those values have to do with art and mission and what we put on stage? Or do they really have to do with how we work with one another and how? Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. So one of the things that we've worked through at Capacity is really clearly defining our values, so much so that they are painted on our wall. I mean, it's on the nose. You can't miss them. And these values really guide everything that we do internally, how we work with our clients, and give us a framework to really think about how we solve challenges, deal with interpersonal issues, and really create a framework for almost everything that we do. And this was something that you really encourage. So I'd just like to talk about why are defining values like this, separate from mission, so important for an organization's health?
Yeah. So you and I have talked for years about this matrix that Jack Welch came up with to kind of evaluate what matters about values versus goals. Goals you get evaluated on a quarterly or annual basis, right? I mean, you work on them with your boss, and then you have your performance review, and you figure out whether you've hit your targets, and that forms the basis of your, maybe you get a promotion or a raise. But what about the values? So in Erik's culture, values have been articulated, at CI values have been articulated and can form the basis of how you might get evaluated. Jack Welch creates this framework that if you're a person who meets the values, upholds the values of your organization and meets the goals, great, you're fantastic, maybe you get a promotion. If you don't uphold the values, don't make your goals, chances are you'll go. If you uphold the values but don't make your goals in a quarter or in a year, maybe you're in the wrong job, maybe you need more training, but you are mission aligned, which means that you could be repurposed. Maybe you should be in another role in the organization, but the most problematic quadrant is where you are consistently meeting your goals but not upholding the values. What does that mean? Probably all of you know someone like this, right? They're great at meeting their targets, they sell a lot of tickets, they cut the budget when they're supposed to, but they are mean to their staff. They brown-nose the CEO, so he has no idea that that this person is mistreating people. And slowly over time, this creates a totally toxic environment. What Jack Welch had to say was, that's the person you have to gird your loins and get rid of, because that toxicity bleeds into the whole organization and undermines morale. And I think that's the blind spot that many leaders have. If you have a person who is consistently meeting goals, you kind of put to the side the fact that they're not upholding the values.
Absolutely. So you're a junior person within an organization, and your organization is not operating by this framework. There's politics at the organization. You feel like it's really hard to get things done, and you're really feeling held back and frustrated because you don't have this framework, and people are getting, the people that are in charge are bringing those problems, really. What do you do? How do you help your organization evolve if you're not the leader of it or the leader of a department?
Yeah, good question. One thing I've observed a lot recently in the more junior people I work with versus the more senior people. Often when we're junior in an organization, we feel powerless. And especially if we're working in a dysfunctional culture, our first instinct is to complain, which can feel good kind of in the moment. But I don't know how useful it is. So I think what we're talking about here is how can we be an agent of change? How can we be part of the solution? So if you're in a dysfunctional culture, why not work on creating a subculture? And it starts with you. How might you learn more about what it means to be a good manager or a good leader? You're all subject matter experts in marketing, in communications, in development. Why not become subject matter experts in organizational development and what it takes to be a leader, how you give feedback, how you receive feedback, how you work more optimally with your colleagues. Take it upon yourself. Ask for professional development, and if it's not given to you, go and seek it. There's lots of free podcasts and webinars. Take a step. Start to be part of the solution.
Great. So we're at a conference all about digital marketing and innovation, and I'm curious how you think these things play into that. How does culture play into being innovative and innovation?
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to get to this more too, but are you in a culture where it's safe to fail? Is it okay to make mistakes? Sorry? Is it okay to ask questions? Is it okay to speak truth to power? If it's not, then chances are it will be challenging to innovate, because who wants to take a risk if you feel that you'll be penalized for that or be made to feel ashamed or maybe even be fired? That is the relationship between culture and innovation.
Yeah. One of the most, I think, groundbreaking things for our company was actually, it was Yosef, our director of analytics, found this article by Kim Scott about radical candor. And it was embraced by our whole team, and I think it's just been groundbreaking in how we talk about feedback, how we give and receive feedback, and it's just been, it shifted our whole culture. So I'd love to talk about radical candor, and so,
Great.
and I know you love it as well.
I do.
So can you define radical candor and talk about how it's helpful?
Yeah. So, yes, there it is. Okay, great. So Kim Scott of Google invented this model, and the kind of genesis of it was that she'd been hired by Sheryl Sandberg to come to Google, and in her first few weeks she had to make this big presentation to the founders, and she knocked it out of the park. She did a great job, and on her way out of the meeting with her boss, Sheryl, she was really excited to have a high five with her, and in fact, Sheryl had a lot of praise for her, but Kim kind of suspected that there was like another shoe that was going to drop, and in fact, Sheryl turned to her and said, "I noticed you said a lot in your presentation." And Kim kind of went like this and thought, oh yeah, I do that a lot. And Sheryl stopped her and looked at her and said, no, when you say a lot, people think you're stupid. And that was kind of a light bulb for Kim. One, because she was able to take that feedback. She really received it and felt that it was something constructive that she could then make actionable, and she did. But more importantly, there was something about the kind of intangible nature of the way that Cheryl gave that feedback that made Kim want to formalize that way of communicating, and that became radical candor. So what is radical candor? Imagine two axes, and I think you don't have to imagine them, you can see them. One is care personally, and the other is challenge directly. So Kim Scott posits that if you are able to care personally about the people you work with, that means someone who's on your team, your boss, your colleagues, and care personally means know them, know something about them, know about their family, know about their work style. If you can care personally about them, that earns you the credibility and reserve of trust to be able to challenge them directly, which means to say something very direct and specific about their performance. Yeah.
We have a visitor and it's driving
I know.
me
Oh,
nuts.
yeah, right.
I'm going to challenge directly that bug.
Yes, right? So what happens if you are not inhabiting the radical candor quadrant? Kim Scott says that the next best thing would be if you were low on caring personally, but high on challenging directly. She kind of sees that as the next best thing. Okay, maybe you need to come up on caring, but at least you know how to challenge. That's obnoxious aggression. Do I need to describe this? If we use the example of, telling someone they have spinach in their teeth, right? Radical candor is taking someone aside and saying, you got some spinach in your teeth. Okay, that's radical candor. Obnoxious aggression would be yelling it across the room, like in a meeting. Ruinous empathy, which is the next worst, and it's my personal favorite, kind of, that's when you really, really care, but really don't know how to challenge. That's, for instance, in a more serious context, when you are not able to give the appropriate feedback to the person who reports to you, and you know that their performance, which isn't good, is demoralizing all the other team members, and you delay and delay and delay in giving that feedback because it's too hard for you to do, and then you have to fire that person, and that person says to you, why didn't you tell me before? That would be ruinous empathy. And manipulative insincerity, where you neither care nor challenge, and you don't tell the person that they have spinach in their teeth because you just don't want to.
Yeah. I would add to radical candor that it has to be, if it's tough feedback, it has to be in person and in the moment, yes. if at all possible. So you don't want to wait 3 days and you'd be like, remember that meeting where you said a lot? Yeah, that was bad. You want to give it immediately, and you want to, so I mean, even in, and I want to highly recommend the Radical Candor book and the Radical Candor podcasts. And it's Russ Lowry and Kim Scott. And they're both really like senior Silicon Valley people. And their podcast is so frank because it's all about times they just messed this up. And I feel like leadership is so much about messing up all the time and then learning from those mistakes. And this podcast is based on that. So they'll talk about all the times that they screwed something up. And if the episode on Ruinous Empathy was this, them talking about how they didn't have the courage to give the tough feedback. And giving tough feedback is so hard, to the point that at Capacity, we now say, I'm going to give you a little radical candor. We like tee it up because it's just, we know it's all hard to do. We're going to brace for it. But I'm going to tell you what, everybody who wants to grow as a person, as a professional, as a leader, wants feedback. They want tough feedback. And giving that tough feedback sucks in the moment. I hate doing it. But I force myself to do it because it is the only way your teams are going to grow. And the other thing I love about this framework is it says, feedback is not to make somebody feel good or feel bad. Take that completely off the table. I'm not telling you you did a good job because I want you to feel good. I'm telling you good job or you didn't do that well to make you a better professional, to help you grow your skills, to help you be better at your job, to help take you to the next level. So it's not about feelings, it's about growth. And it's about helping the person. And if you care personally about them, of course you want them to grow as a leader. And they're not going to necessarily love it in the moment, but I guarantee you a week later or a month later, they're going to respect you more, they're going to be happier, and your organization is going to be more successful because of it. A few other things about radical candor. This isn't a question, it's just me talking. The one thing you're not supposed to do is what they call a shit sandwich, which you probably do this. I'm very guilty of this. Hey, Jenny, I love those earrings. You look, and you really
Thanks.
Look amazing today.
Thank you.
By the way, you really messed up that presentation. And, you did a really great job the other day on such and such. So you see, I buried the tough feedback between two positive things.
I feel so confused.
Yeah. And that's to make myself feel good, right? To make it feel easier for me. That's not helpful. You have to just go out and say the feedback.
And I think it's worth saying, why is that hard, right? We were all trained that if we don't have something nice to say, don't say anything. But so you really have to undo that training because now we're in a different scenario where it is your moral obligation to tell your team member, and in radical candor, it's not just feedback down to people who report to you, it's your lateral colleagues and your boss. That's what this is about. So imagine a world, going back to that question about if you're a junior person, what do you do? Can you imagine going to your boss and saying, would you be open to my giving you a piece of feedback? That might be something to try.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think it's super important, and to fully embrace this as an organization, everyone at every level has to be super open to it. And, I feel like people are scared to give it to, if you have to create a culture that's safe enough where people feel safe enough to give that feedback.
What do you do when you receive a piece of feedback?
I think about it a lot.
How do you, Erik, I noticed that you really,
Come on, Jenny. Give it to me.
You really talked over that person a lot in that meeting.
Well, I guess my best self would say thank you for pointing that out. It's clearly it was a blind spot for me. I either noticed it or didn't notice it, and I'll think about it and try better next time.
So I notice you're not defending yourself against that feedback,
Right.
that you're just kind of taking it in and absorbing it. That's a good way to receive feedback.
I also think there's this thing I've thought about, which is like, everyone's truth is their truth. And if you can take that as fact where, okay, it may not be your truth, but you don't have to win on that. It's like, okay, this is their experience of the situation. Okay. And if there's particular things that are your hot buttons and you realize those are the things that you're thinking about at night and you're losing sleep over and you're bringing them with you for a long time, it probably makes sense to write those things down and think about them because they're probably things that are going to happen multiple times. And I think the goal is to shorten the amount of time those things push your hot buttons. Right? And so if you feel like, okay, someone said something bad to me, what is this triggering? Is there a pattern of this? And how can I recognize that pattern and shorten the duration for how long it impacts me? That's Ray Dalio. He just wrote this amazing book called Principles, and that's his idea. Yeah, and we have a lot of resources for you guys. One other thing on radical candor that I think is, if you listen to the podcast, they, since they're tech people, they created an app called the Radical Candor app. What was it called? Candor Coach, right? Thank you. And they discontinued it, which is fine. They were focusing on their podcast and their book, which is good. But what I loved about that app was it made you enter in all of the people on your team. And there were two categories, like positive, I don't want to call it positive and negative, but like, feedback that is on the whatever, positive side or more challenging feedback. And every day you're supposed to give 3 pieces of tough feedback and 3 pieces of, positive feedback. And again, to the point that the feedback is to not make someone feel good or bad, but it's to make the person perform better. And it's even better feedback. Instead of just saying, you did this, it's saying, you did this, and because of, this is how it affected the business. So when you do X, Y, and Z on a phone call, it makes it look like you don't care, which, is going to erode our reputation, or something like that. So it's tying your feedback to broader business results. It's not just giving the feedback because you notice it. It's how can you tie it to something in the bigger picture.
Even as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, wow, this sounds like a lot of people giving a lot of feedback all the time. But when you think about how we spend our time at work, we're having those conversations. Usually we're just having them behind the back of the person that we're working with. So really what this is rechanneling what you would otherwise say and saying it straight to the face of the person who is doing that behavior. So, once this kind of gets going and you are front channeling all of these conversations, something begins to shift. You're dealing more truthfully, more directly with the people with whom you work, and now you're working together. Instead of working against one another.
Yeah. It's Christopher Williams, our vice president, says it's about forward-facing channels. We do not want these conversations to happen in back channels. We want them happening in forward-facing channels, and that ties into our happiness value. So when you look at if people are having these back channel conversations, that's in direct challenge to our happiness value, which is part of your performance evaluation. And as a new team member for the first year, every 3 months you have to go through this the performance evaluation as a conversation. And in that performance evaluation is how are you, behaving against these core values. And I gotta say that's been super, super helpful. Yeah. This is a feedback, a quote from one of your colleagues.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, receiving feedback can sometimes feel kind of crappy. So if you think about it, reframe it, as we say, as the fertilizer that is helping you to grow, it might make it a little easier for you to accept.
And you guys know what fertilizer is.
Yeah, I used it. Euphemism.
Is there anything that you want to add to the radical candor framework that we didn't touch on? I love your story about radical candor with
my story about radical candor, which I now see as radical candor, but when it happened, I did not see it, and it's pretty short, which is that I was once in my boss's office. I think I name her in my blog. Is that the story we're talking about? Yeah. Jane is her name, and she said to me, Jenny, can I give you some constructive feedback? And I said, sure, yeah. She said, try using your brain, which was, it was very her. I'm sure there's somebody in this audience who knows her. The thing is, I knew what she meant. She meant I was phoning it in, and I had a long relationship with this person. We had a very personal relationship. She had been to my wedding. So I was able to assimilate that. That's not exactly the way I recommend you give radical candor. I mean, like maybe it should be more specific. But in that context, I really got it. And actually, that was she was a boss for over a decade, who really was a person like a coach, who saw qualities in me that I absolutely did not see in myself, and was constantly pushing me beyond what I thought I could do, and telling it to me straight, which was the greatest, it was the greatest single thing that happened to me in my professional life.
Wow. One thing before we move on to radical candor, that care personally piece of the matrix, I can't recommend highly enough. If you're having a challenge with somebody, the more you can dial up that care personally, meaning take them out for coffee, take them out for a meal, spend time with them so you can actually build that personal relationship, it's just, it's going to help your ability to then give better feedback and have a better relationship. Yeah. So let's move on to another topic under the category of, I think, personal growth, I guess. And one of the frameworks we talk about is the Saboteur framework. So do you want to tee up what that is?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, your mind is your best friend and your worst enemy. The saboteur is that voice inside your head which provides that kind of running dialogue of negativity. It might sound like, well, you can't say that in the meeting, you're going to make an ass of yourself. Or you can't go for that job. Everyone's so much more qualified than you are. Show of hands, anybody have a voice like that running through their head? Now wait a minute, keep your hands up. Now look around. So the best kept secret of the saboteur is that we all think we're the only ones who have one. The person who's kind of created the framework that you and I talk about a lot is this coach. He's a coach to Fortune 500 CEOs. His name is Shahzad Shamin. We'll put these resources up on the screen later. And he's written a book called Positive Intelligence. And his kind of origin story is that he grew up in a kind of a home with these very exacting, demanding, and judgmental parents. He found himself at Stanford Business School in a study group with about 12 fellow students, and they were going around kind of sharing some feedback with one another about how they were working together. And the guy sitting next to Shahzad says, you know, I need to tell you, Shahzad, I have never interacted with someone more judgmental than you. I feel so horrible every time I interact with you. And Shahzad said, wow, I'm really sorry that you feel that way. I hear what you're saying. But in his mind, he was thinking, man, what a loser. Of course he feels judged by me. He's the stupidest person in the group. So then the next person speaks, and the next person, and the next person, and they all have the same thing to say to him about how judgmental he is. And by the time he gets to halfway around the circle, a light bulb goes off. Wait a minute. I see that I'm directing that incredibly judgmental voice that I feel in me towards the people in my life. And that set him on a path to kind of come up with this framework for the saboteurs, because he saw that that voice inside his head was sabotaging him. What he would say is that the biggest single obstacle to our ability to have both success and happiness is the power of this saboteur, and not the external circumstances in which we find ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to put up a slide here that shows these saboteurs. And my saboteur is called the pleaser. And
what is that? Yeah.
Meaning, it's really what ties into giving tough feedback, right? Because I want to be liked, and so I don't want to say things that are going to make people not like me, and that gets in the way of me being it's gotten in the way of me being a better leader. And so by identifying that I have this challenge, and I'll have sessions with Jennifer, and I'll start talking about something, and she'll be like, I think I hear the pleaser saboteur. I'm like, oh, yeah, obviously. Okay, that's it. And so once you could recognize that, and the thing that's helped me is like externalizing that and saying, okay, think of it as like this little devil on your shoulder, that is the saboteur speaking, and it's not necessarily your mindful self, makes it much easier. And I think a lot of my team suffers from the judge saboteur. And so do you want to talk about what that one is?
Yeah, I mean, Shazad would say we all have the judge saboteur, although you and I talk about how that doesn't plague you as much, and that we all have these then a cohort of under saboteurs who support the judge. But the judge saboteur is very powerful, and I definitely relate to it. That's the voice that I kind of described to you earlier. The one who judges every move we make, judges every decision, who might say, don't do this, there's danger. There are lots of different frameworks that describe this kind of thing. I mean, some people also call it lizard brain, right? I mean, that stress feeling that we get when cortisol is flowing through our body, that kind of ancient vestigial part of our brain on stress puts us in this kind of tunnel where we feel all we can see is the fear, and we've got to run away from this lion. That's what the judge saboteur makes us feel. So what do we do about it? What do we do about it? It starts with noticing it. Oh, wait a minute, that's my judge saboteur. Notice and name. I have my clients name their saboteurs. Steve, whatever you want to call it. But just starting to recognize that this is not you. This is some little devil on your shoulder. And every time that voice comes into your head, starting to notice and name it. Maybe for 2 weeks you want to write it down every time you hear that voice come into your head. And take 3 deep breaths, get some oxygen in your body, and start activating that other part of your brain. And what would it be like to reframe what that judge has to say to you, instead of, you can't go for that job, you don't have a master's degree, everyone else applying for that job has a master's degree. What might that other part of your brain say, your sage? Your sage might say, okay, true, you don't have a master's, but you've got 10 years experience in the field, you've got a great track record of leading a team, you're smart, you're connected, you're funny, why not go for it? Any of this resonating for people?
Another framework I just want to bring up, and I feel like I could do a whole conference on some of these themes, but I just want to introduce people to them. And then we have a whole list of resources. If any of this is resonating with you, there's like a reading list and podcasts, and I just want to give everybody that. But we talk a lot about approaching things with a mindset of non-attachment, which is very Buddhist. And so many times I'll come, not less now, but really when we first started working together, which is probably like 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I would come to Jennifer with things, and I would be really riled up and really upset about it. And what would you say?
It seems like you're overly attaching to that, Erik.
And then what?
What would it take for you to cultivate a mindset of non-attachment?
That is so liberating. What would it take if you approach this with a mindset of non-attachment? Meaning like, this person said this and it made me feel this way and I'm so frustrated. And if you're just like, wow, I'm really attached to that. Like, why am I so attached to this? And what if I stepped away from that attachment. And I guess what that does is perhaps takes it out of the lizard brain.
That's exactly right. I mean, how many times a day in all of your jobs, you're working with teams, you're under pressure, a new show's going up tomorrow night, people are in a high-stress situation. It's so easy to get caught up in that churn of emotion. And you know exactly what that feels like. You're in the middle of a task and somebody says something to you that makes you insane. And all of a sudden you're on this river, floating away, goodbye, goodbye. I mean, your task is back here, you're so far away, you're somewhere else. What are the tools you could use to lessen that drift? So we talk a lot about meditation and mindfulness, which is the exercise for the brain that, you know, the analogy is that you go to the gym to exercise your body, you exercise your mind through meditation and mindfulness. What does that mean? It means giving yourself some time to sit quietly, focus on your breath. There are many ways to do meditation. It could be a body scan, but the whole point is to bring you back to the present moment so that you can stop stressing about the past and hanging on to that, and stop living in the future, planning for the future, planning, but being in the now. Of course, in our jobs, we have to plan. And of course, we have to learn from history. But the stuff of our life and our happiness and joy live in the present. Our thinking, our innovation, our fulfillment is in the present. So the more time we can spend there, the better off we are. Meditation and mindfulness also invites you to inhabit a space of non-judgment. Going back to that idea of the Judge Saboteur, what you're doing in meditation is noticing your thoughts in an environment of non-judgment. I'm sure I've told you this story. In my very first meditation class, decades ago, I'm sitting on the floor, I'm at a retreat, and the meditation leader says, we're in an atmosphere, we're breathing, we're in an atmosphere of non-striving. Yes? What do you mean, non-striving? She said, well, we're just in the present, we're not planning for the future, we're not striving. Okay. Then aren't I striving to be non-striving? It takes practice. It takes practice to get out of that constant striving and be where we are. And the result of that is that the next time that annoying person comes to you and interrupts you in the middle of the task, you find yourself able to take a breath and exist in that mindset of non-judgment and respond rather than react with that emotional churn.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not the most consistent meditator. I go through periods where I do meditate, and when I do, I feel great. But I read something where he's a meditation coach, and he said, you know, it's not everyone is going to be able to take 10 or 20 minutes out of their day. Jan, our photographer right there, meditates 2 times 20 minutes every day for the past 5 years? 4 years. He's super chill. I'm not. I'm getting more, but I'm, you know. But this meditation coach said, you know, if you can't do that, take one mindful breath. Like, even if in a day you can take one mindful breath, like that, to me, it is super helpful. If you're feeling overwhelmed, 1, maybe 3.
Let's do it together.
Okay.
Okay, ready? That felt great.
Yeah. It's interesting. I love the Tim Ferriss's podcast. I don't know if anyone else listens to it, but he's super type A, super, go, go, go. And he interviews just leaders in their field, of all sorts of fields, athletics, business, dog training, everything. And it's amazing. I think of the leaders that he interviews, 80% of them have a mindfulness practice. I think because to achieve in this world just is such a strain on our brains and bodies that people at that level need the other side of that in order, to survive.
I was thinking about what Colleen was talking about yesterday, about the fishbowl and all that noise. This is the antidote to that. Taking that breath, can't you hear more clearly now? I mean, the sound of my heart pounding has decreased, I mean, being in the present, and what are some other techniques? I think you're right, taking one mindful breath, bringing yourself back to the senses. What do I see? What do I hear? What do I smell? What do I taste? Where am I right now? Giving yourself the joy and pleasure of the experience of now. It might feel like we've gotten far afield from being at a digital marketing conference, but I don't really think we have.
Absolutely. So I want to leave plenty of time for questions, and so I wanted to go to our influences, authors and resources. And we talked about a lot of these. I don't know if there's any ones you want to particularly highlight, if you can even read that there. But we have Pema Chodron. It might be easier to look there. John Kabat-Zinn and Dan Harris under meditation and mindfulness.
Yeah, I think let's just give people these resources. I mean, we've talked about a lot of them. I mean, I would point out that Brene Brown writes a lot about the power of vulnerability. And just going back to those difficult, crunchy interactions that you might be having with your colleagues. You talked about dialing up the care personally, and I would also think about dialing up your own humility and dialing up your own vulnerability. One of the biggest challenges of working for artistic people who often have big egos, they have big ideas and are used to kind of directing things. Many of them are directors. So we don't have a lot of examples of leaders with humility necessarily. And it can be a very powerful tool. What would it be like to be vulnerable in front of my colleagues? Just try it out.
So, I wanted to do this session because this has just tremendously helped me over over the last few years. It's just been such a tremendous help in grounding. And so I wanted to share this with this community, and I hope this was helpful to people, and I'd love to open the room to questions. Yeah, I think, John, I saw your hand up first. Let's wait till we grab the mics here. So right there, in the front. There you go.
So thank you for having this session. I think it's really powerful, and I've worked with a coach before as well, so it's reminding me to kind of give her a phone call. She recommended a book called Taming Your Gremlin, which is about the saboteur, so that's also a good resource. I was curious if you could speak a little bit about innovation in the sense that we're all either asked to step up and lead or are in positions of leadership, and also must keep the train on the rails. So we're asked to do a lot with the show opening the next day or whatever that is. So there's a lot of work that needs to get done and work that has to be trafficked, but you're also asked to lead. So I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about strategies or ideas to help keep innovation at the forefront. Whether you talked a little bit about self-care and like the meditation stuff, so how to focus on self as a leader, but are there other things, time that we should allocate during the week for innovation specifically, or how do you keep it going with all of the things on the plate?
Do you want to?
We've talked about that. So what does it mean to both be an individual contributor and a leader? Yeah.
That's really what it is. And that's a framework. I think Christopher, that's a radical candor, right? The innovate. Yeah. We talk about individual contributors, which are the versus like I guess she calls it manager, or yeah. And so the manager's role is to not necessarily do the work, but create the environment for your team to do the work. Now, that's a theory. I know with limited resources, that's not always possible, but if you think of your day of that way, so maybe a percentage of your time can be spent in sort of the leadership piece of it and then the individual contributor piece. I know in my day, I am so overscheduled. If I need to do individual contributor stuff, that has to happen on the day I work from home or on the weekends. But like every day at the office, I think of my time as like that is leadership time. That is the way I will get results through inspiring, problem solving, and spending time with my team. And then my individual contributor time is separately, meaning I'm addicted to email, but over the years, I've put myself and said, you know what, I can do the emails at night. I try to really decompartmentalize that and realize that those are two separate things and need to be compartmentalized.
I would just add, experimenting with how you're delegating to your team, because it sounds like you're acting both as an individual contributor and as a manager of staff. Is that right? Yeah, I mean, being explicit with them, saying, I have a challenge, which is that I need to both create a vision for our department, and I need to be on the ground doing this work. I'd like to experiment with delegating more to you, and let's stay in really close touch about how that's going, because the more I can offload to you and make sure that you're okay and that you're doing a good job and that we're working together, the more I can keep my eye up here and be more innovative and be giving you the leadership that you need and the support you need.
Yeah. And I also want to say, I said weekends. I do not want people working on weekends. I don't think that is ideal.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
encouraging working on the weekends.
Yeah, thanks for saying
that. Yeah, absolutely. Next question. John, I saw your hand.
Thank you for this morning. I think this has been really fascinating, given us a lot of things to think about. One thing I was just thinking about now was that the connection to our art form, and basically every one of us here, I think, works in an art form that gives people a chance to step out of their lives, gives them a chance for moments of meaning, of mindfulness. So, I mean, I hate to think of how we can market that or like use it for fundraising, but our art form is a way for people to practice this mindfulness. So there's that connection there, and I just want to kind of bring that up, but just keep thinking about it for myself to see where that leads to.
Yeah. I mean, Lauren brought that up in that LaPlaca-Cohen study about like people taking time to be with their friends and family, and that's why they come to the arts. I also thought in some of the social media sessions yesterday and in those videos, the ones that are really meaningful are about the audience experience. Like when Lauren's showing kids in a theater, it's not about necessarily what's on stage, but it's celebrating the human elements of the experience. And a lot of the videos as well were about it wasn't showing exactly what's on the stage, about the experience of going to a cultural institution. Those are really meaningful. So absolutely, how can we infuse that sensibility in our marketing? I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and Colleen yesterday spoke about, our commitment to both creating excellence and committing to the integrity of our institutions. We should be committing to that integrity and that excellence in our organizational culture too.
Absolutely. I saw your hand in the middle. I'm sorry, it's lots of questions.
I have two questions for Erik. How do you talk a little bit about how you induct people into the environment of radical candor, particularly new staff, and clients?
Yeah.
Clients.
Well, I have to give a huge shout out to Christopher Williams on my team so we have a program at Capacity called CIU, which is our development of new staff. And we hire in classes now because onboarding is such a huge lift. So we will hire a group of, say, 3 or 4 people at once and put them through a multi-week training program where they sit in the conference room for 2 weeks and are not asked to do anything but learn. And one of the sessions that we go through is CI culture, which talks about the history of the company, talks about the values, talks about what those values mean. And Christopher always says, you're not going to believe me when I say this, but this is how we operate, and these are the rules of the game. And so that's how we do it initially. With our clients, I think having a strong culture internally within an organization, creating a safe space where there's no politics or minimal politics, allows us then to be in a position where we are better armed to deal with the challenges that are coming at us from the external side. And so, you know, so with clients, I mean, we put our values in our proposals, we put our values on our website, we put our, you know, where teams are definitely open to talk about values, you know, and we talk about it on the podcast. This is really the first time publicly we've had, beyond the podcast, that we've sort of had this, and I think there may be more opportunities, so I don't know if it goes beyond that. I mean, I don't know if you guys, yeah, it's okay? Yeah, in the middle.
Totally hypothetical work situation here. I've had the fortune of having some really great managers who have helped develop my leadership skills at a fairly young age. How would you handle coming into a work environment where the folks have generally been there long term and might not want to follow direction because I'm younger than them, essentially? Hypothetical, but important.
So this is your team.
Yes. Hypothetically.
Hypothetically. I would ask you, how do you think you should handle it?
I try to with grace, but, you know, some people are some people.
So I'm a big fan of, you know, and this is part of the radical candor model, of being explicit and clear. So if you've come into a culture where there's culture clash, and you've taken on a team that is not hearing you or understanding you, what could you say to make things more clear? That's an actual question.
You know, I just don't know. I think I fit really well with the culture. I think it's just...
Just give me an example of something you could say that's clear.
You need a drink? I don't know. Honestly, don't know. I try to be pretty upfront. And
How about something like, I'm observing that we are not communicating in the way that I want us to. Here's my philosophy of management. I'm not really I don't love to be a top-down leader. I don't want to be a micromanager. And I don't know whether this is true, but I hope it's true.
It's true.
I don't want to get too much in your business, but I do want you to hear what my general direction is, and if there's a question, I want you to come back to me, and if I don't hear a question, my expectation is that you're going to be delivering on what it is that we've talked about. And so far, I'm noticing that that's not happening. Does that resonate with you?
No, it does. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Hypothetical, though, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay, one more question. Or
Was that scary?
No, it was great. I love it when I ask her questions like that, and she'll be like, what I'm seeing is, that's a great opening. Like, what I'm observing is, or what I'm hearing is, it just sort of sets the tone. I think that's a good framework. Did you have?
Yeah, I had a question about when...
I know we're on Facebook Live, so we got to the mic. I'm sorry.
So, okay, again, hypothetical question. When your organization, when it's the executive leaders that kind of give that negative vibe that kind of trickles down, and then you have to handle that junior staff and kind of smooth some of that over, like how do you handle that situation without undermining those executive people?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think probably that resonates for a lot of people. Right, you're walking a line, you're in the middle, you need to keep the morale of your own team up, and you also have to manage that challenging situation. This is the perfect time for you to lean into creating your subculture, right? You need to step into the leader you want to be You want to be maybe more compassionate than the leadership you're getting, or whatever it is. You want to communicate in a clear style. You need to be a translator. You know, everything we're talking about today is about putting your own oxygen mask on first. So you need to get yourself the support, the tools that you need so that you can be strong to be able to deal with whatever you're dealing with here and be compassionate and a good leader for your team. And the idea is perhaps the subculture you're creating could start being a model that fans out to the rest of the organization. That doesn't always happen. But as you become more comfortable with the idea of radical candor and some of these other tools, you might gain the courage and tools to start offering some feedback up.
Thank you all for your enthusiasm and questions, and thank you, Jennifer. This was
Thank
awesome.
you. Thank you.